Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Las Vegas. I'm Nick Mothershaw. I'm Chief Identity Strategist at the Open Identity Exchange. We've got about an hour for this masterclass workshop. I'm going to be asking you some questions as we go. So I very much want your input on some of the work we've been doing over the last year or so. We've got some really interesting findings from some analysis we've done on the DNA of digital identity. And then what we're now doing is building on that work and working out how we can make interoperability a reality around the globe. And I want to take this opportunity to really get everyone's input. So I do want you asking me questions. I do want you getting interactive here. So let's kick off. Let's start with the question. So you're in Vegas. How many of you have had a flutter so far? How many of you have had a gamble? Hands up. Who's been on the tables? No? Not many. Keep your hand up if you've won. They're too lucky. Yeah. that's 50-50 actually. So somewhere in there, the odds are going to be playing slightly in the favour of the casinos. I think that's how all this works. So my name's Nick Mothershaw. I work with the Open Identity Exchange. My colleague Gareth Nareen Singh is about. He's in the same delightfully orange shirt as me. So if you want to catch either of us throughout the event, we also have a booth over in the exhibition later on, so you drop over and have a chat. What I'm going to be taking you through today. So I'm going to talk about what the Identity Exchange is, a bit about this finding of the digital ID of DNA, frameworks for wallets. So where are we going with this? We've been doing frameworks for years, but we're now talking about frameworks for wallets. And then how do wallets interoperate across frameworks, and how does identity assurance interoperate against frameworks? And on those last three, I'm going to pose you some questions and thoughts as we go through, and then kind of wrap up with some takeaways. But who are we? What is the Open Identity Exchange? Well, we are a members' organisation. Slightly the wrong order. These are our members, and all of these members share the same vision. They join us and they work with us and contribute funding that enables us to pursue this vision of us all having a reusable, interoperable digital ID that we can use anywhere we go around the globe, and it is trusted everywhere we go. So that's been our vision for a long time. It's quite a lofty vision that we wish to achieve. And that's why we think it's a good vision. We are taking steps towards it as we go and as we move forward. So to do that, we do three broad categories of things. We do thought leadership. So we and our members get together. We look at particular problem areas, topics, and that's where we came up with the analysis that we wanted to do on the trust frameworks. We publish on that. We talk at events like this on the thought leadership that we have created, and all of that is to move the industry in this direction of interoperability. We do a lot of influencing and insight on governments, responding to consultations, working directly with governments on what their next steps are around digital identity. And for our members, we provide a lot of market insights and market tracking, so they get an easy kind of feed of news and what's going on in the market. And then finally, we do a lot of promotion. So one of the things we've realised is that probably everyone in this room is bought into the concept of digital identity. If you went out there on the strip and said to somebody, hey, what's digital identity? They wouldn't have a clue. And even if they did, and they said, would you want one? They'd say, no, it's not the top of anyone's mind to go and get a digital identity. So we need to explain it, promote it, remove often quite a lot of myths that have become associated with digital identity. So we do a lot of that as well. We've got another presentation tomorrow, which is looking at some work we did there with acceptors of identity and their readiness for digital identity, and we were quite shocked with our own findings on that. So do come back and see that one tomorrow. It was in association with Dayon. So the DNA of digital ID. We're all about trust frameworks. We've got our own guide to trust frameworks. You can go on our website and see what a good trust framework should contain, how it should be structured, what the roles and governance around that are. And over the years, lots of different countries or organisations have written digital identity trust frameworks. And we're sitting there saying, well, our goal is to make them interoperate. Well, to do that, we probably need to know a bit more about the detail of what's been done in those implementations. So we went off and did some analysis. We analysed 8 different frameworks. We started with the UK, and then did the EU, the EI-2 version. NIST, version 4 draft had just come out, so we thought we'd do the latest version. Made more sense to do that as it's directional as to where it's going. Canada, Sweden, Thailand, Singapore, and MOSIP as a solution platform as opposed to an individual implementation. And what we did is we basically read all the policies and all the technical documents and started to pull out the common policy areas and policy criteria that each of these different frameworks exhibit. And that was... I found that fascinating work. For most people, it wouldn't be very exciting at all, but I spent a huge amount of time poring over all these frameworks and drawing out from it.
Quick question, if I may.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the last slide.
Yeah, sure.
So I say EU has a framework, Sweden has a framework. So what's the reason that the countries are not adopting to the broader?
Yeah, so what we chose here was, we said here frameworks or schemes. So Sweden has the Bank ID scheme, which is an implementation. It is digital identity delivered by the banks in Sweden. It's an example of a mature, it's saturated the population, 98% I think uses their quoted figure in terms of the adult population uses a Bank ID. The EU EIDAS framework sits above that as a framework for solutions. And it's evolving quickly into a wallet framework. So we were looking at two different, one a mature implementation and one more of a evolving wallet-based movement. So we found different things from looking at the different schemes. And you might say we shouldn't have found that. We should have found that Sweden exhibited everything that the overarching EU was doing, but we didn't. We found different things in the analysis. It is, but we only have a limited time. I do. Far away, please. Yeah. So it was a new version that was released in draft. We did this analysis over last summer, and it was extending the NIST 83 ABC. Was it 63? I'm getting confused now. 63, yeah, 63 ABC were being extended, and it was, for our perspective, it was taking them from what we would describe as a set of standards for identity towards a framework. It's adding more comprehensive management around the data. Now, I must admit, I don't know where it's got to. I was hoping to catch up with some of the NIST team here this week on where they've got to with it. But that was bringing in some things like more on fraud, more on equality. So bringing in some other things that are more general policy areas beyond the more technical ones that it covers already. What we found was this. This is the big spreadsheet with all the criteria and all the values in it. And when we zoomed out on it, it looked a little like one of those strips that you get when you've done a DNA analysis, and that's where this analogy came from, that we'd discovered the DNA of DigitalID. It's a good analogy because what we discovered is that these frameworks work in the same general policy rule areas. Some of them don't address an area or two because they're not as comprehensive as the others, but they all work in the same way. And that's not surprising really because they've all copied from each other over the years, and some of that was copied from an original work that we did back in 2012 or something like that. So it's not surprising you've got a lot of commonality, but you've got differences as well. And one of the areas we particularly focused on was the identity assurance policy element. That's a specialism of digital identity trust frameworks. How do you proof the individual and make sure you can trust them? And I'll come on to that in a moment because we found something quite special there and a methodology that then leads into our work as we move forward. If you want to find out more about that particular paper, because I've got limited time today, you can see the OIX library. If you scan that QR code, it will take you directly to the link where this paper is in our library. If you're not a member, it will ask you who you are, just so we know who's downloading the paper and where it's going. But it's free to consume. What we haven't done yet is published the actual detail of the analysis. So if I step back a little bit, in this we found a huge amount of, I think it's 75 different policy criteria underneath these 15 rule areas, and 289 different possible values or value settings that the trust frameworks exhibited. And then if you take one framework, you get the settings for those values across the 75 different criteria across these 15 areas. So we've got a tool here that we think is quite useful, and one of the things we're doing now is exploring how that tool can be used by other frameworks as well. There's much more about it in the report. The detail, the values we haven't published. We're going to move to sharing those more broadly in something called the City Hub, which we're now working as part of, but we're not ready to publish them yet. And we think there's quite a bit of work to do on turning that into a properly ratified set of framework values. Well, what this has led us on to then is to look at, okay, the UD wallet, the EIDAS2 framework, is moving towards the world of wallets. You'll hear lots about wallets at the conference here today, lots of sessions about where wallets are going. We've always talked about digital ID at OIX. Around 2.5 years ago, we released our new guide to trust frameworks for what we called Smart Digital ID at the time. And it was basically an architecture for a wallet-based framework. And a lot of what we've done in there, you can see appearing in what the EU's now done. You can see the term derived credential, which I think we invented within that analysis, is now used quite often around deriving a new one from other credentials. So that's about a couple of years. We want to do more work on that and evolve it further to see how we support wallets. So our frameworks to date, and this came out in the analysis we did in terms of the different areas people look at, have really dealt with two sets of rules. So we have the digital ID account trust rules. They're the general policy rules we found in the DNA analysis. Then we have specific rules around identity assurance. How do we evaluate who the user is to make sure we're giving the user, the correct user, the digital identity? And those are the two elements we're seeing in most frameworks. And the way that looks as a diagram is we'd have identity proofing providers using some form of authoritative source. That could be walking into a government office with a paper document and saying, hi, I'm me, and then walking out of it with a digital ID. That's an authoritative source. Or it could be using lots of different data sets that are available in the market, as happens more in the US and the UK. Well, that process of ID proofing is a key process in the framework, as is then the general rules that are monitoring the reusable thing. And these two things came together to make a digital ID provider. The proofing and issuing the thing to the user that's reusable so they can prove who they are again and again and again. And that's what we've seen in all the ID implementations we've seen around the world. As we move to wallets, this gets a bit more complicated. And the clicker on there doesn't work. We add some other roles around this. So we've still got the ID proofing provider and the assurance rules. We've still got in the middle the reusable provider, which is the wallet provider, and rules for that. And that's what you see in the EU's ARF, the Architecture Reference Framework. We then have issuers. Issuers are going to issue credentials. The identity proof credential is a very special credential. In the EU documents, it's called the PID, the Personal Identifiable Data. Most frameworks carve that out as a special piece of data around identity, and it forms the trust anchor in everything else. So that remains a separate element of the framework. But we now introduce the more general eligibility issuer. So that's things like education information, employment information, health information. It's saying who you are, what you're eligible. It's giving more information about you. It's attached to your core ID so you can communicate it. What about the rules for that? How are we going to get rules that mean credentials are trusted and issued in a consistent way? And then we have this other role over here, because what we're starting to realize is the wallet is a container. The user may have several wallets with different credentials in them, and the user then needs help through the process to answer the relying party's increasingly difficult questions. You want to get on my plane. I need to know who you are. Have you got a passport? Have you got a visa for where you're going? Have you got the right health credentials for where you're going? I want to enter employment. Well, what's your employment history? What are your qualifications? So gathering all of this information on a use case perspective, we believe is another role that is emerging in the process. And one of the things I want to ask you in a minute is your thoughts on this, on these roles. Do they need separate rules, and why? We're already seeing, and what we're overlaying on it, is now much more complexity. The EU's introduced a credential schema provider or an EAA schema provider in their context. So there's lots of other subsidiary roles that are now sitting around this that support this ecosystem and make it work. And we're unfolding our framework to explore this more. When we map that concept of these 4 elements of the framework back to what frameworks are already doing and look at what's happening in the EU, UK and US, what we see is the EU is already tackling those generic wallet rules in the main body of the ARF, the Architecture Reference Framework. It's got a PID rulebook and it's got an ETSI standard for ID proofing. That remains, and that's the ID proofing roles element. The credential trust rules, it's starting to talk about rule books for particular credential types and how that's done and who that's done by. And that's an area we want to explore further. And then on the use case rules element, there is now also a mention of ARF attestation rule books. So what are the rules around attesting credentials from wallets to relying parties? So the EU's already moving towards this model. The UK already kind of supports it. It's moving to a new role of holder service provider and a separate role of ID proofing provider, splitting its digital ID provider role. So that will come out in the next version of the UK framework. It already supports 2 types of schemes for provision and schemes for consumption. That model is in the framework and it's there to enable private sector to enable those elements, but it's light on the rules in that area at the moment. They need to be added. And the US, it covers with the wallet, parts of A and B talk about the wallet policy. A and B talks about proofing and parts are touching on use case rules, bits of it at the moment. But it's not really going into the issuer, the credential elements at all at the moment. So what new rules are required? So, and this is where we're at in our working group at the moment. So our working group on this meets every month, and this is pretty much the last slide we got to in our last working group. And we're trying to explore for these new areas of credential trust and use case trust, what are the rules we need to see adding to frameworks to make this function as we move into the world of wallets. So on credential trust, we're thinking around record keeping, schema rules. One of the big challenges here is if you've got, let's say, education, that you've got lots of different education establishments, you need them all to spit out a credential that is consistent and is to a standard. So someone has got to do that and define those standards. For things like passports, that's done on a global basis with a digital travel credential. But for education, for employment, even for banking information as a credential, none of those things are there in the market yet. So how is that going to be done? Who's going to do it? What's the governance that needs to go around it? And then on the use case trust, what types of credentials are acceptable to meet the use case? It might be a simple use case. How old are you? Are you old enough to buy alcohol out on the strip or gamble? Are you over 21? That question is very nuanced. It sounds an easy question, but actually the proofs you can use to say that you are over 21 are a limited set. They normally need to come from a government. They need to be, if you're going to do it digitally, you need to be able to validate and verify that it's a genuine proof in a digital way, not a glance at a document as is done today. So the rules get quite complicated quite quickly. So which credentials are needed, which are required, can things be derived? So is age actually a derived credential? It's an attribute, certainly, but we've quite a lot of debates around that. How's data minimization handled? So we've got less rules there, as you can see in that area. And we'll come on to a particular role around wallets with a credential selector in a moment. But in these 2 areas around the edge of supply and then provision out of wallets, is there anything else you would see that should be on this list? Is there anything we've missed? Any thoughts?
So in terms of digital identity, which has to be verified across the borders, how would that?
That's a brilliant question. That's part 4. We'll come on to that in a bit. Okay, so if you have any thoughts on that, then let me know, and we'll add extra elements into that area. But I wanted to ask you a broader question. I'll come back to the model in a minute, just to remind you of what we've just gone through. But I want to know, this is our view of the way things are evolving. We're seeing it manifest in frameworks already. is this a logical evolution? Have we got this right? What are the challenges and omissions you see in our overall model here? And all of these new roles we're introducing, what do you think about that? That's quite complex, isn't it? Do we need that level of complexity to make this work? Or, we can get a bit academic in our thinking sometimes and overanalyze things. So I wanted to kind of get your view on that. So, just to remind everyone, we're going from this, where we've got ID proofing providers and reusable ID providers. They're staying in the same place, but we're adding more rules for credentials and use cases with new roles for issuance and helping out on the relying party end. And then we're adding all of these other roles on top of that are supporting roles, which to be fair, I haven't gone into because I haven't got time today. So I'll probably wind it back to that one. So, but in terms of these two kind of key roles, the use case provider and the eligibility issuer, what do people think of those? Are these necessary roles that we need to recognise in frameworks going forward?
I mean, are frameworks about narrow industry, situations, right? Because you're starting to see this CSP balkanization like crazy, right? Whether, you should stick everything in AWS and you're good to go, right? So then the means of enablement of all of these kind of facets are just native to the CSP providing those services. So whether they conform to this or not, it's really up to them. So it becomes this idea that if you're not consuming your identity from, whatever Balkan island you're living in, if it's Microsoft, AWS, it's Google, it's whatever. I think that's the thing that at least, some of us like SP solution providers are trying to understand when we advise our clients is, there's a lot of desire for this, but then there's a lot of sense of validation that to be accounted for. So then the question becomes, do you take the easy way out? And then, then it turns into just kind of, I need a simple proofing layer, and then I can do what I want kind of in the back. So I think that's some of the challenges. While like if you're in a banking scenario or NERC SIP scenario, something like that, you do need this level of control and this level of extension. But that's that industry industry vertical that a framework like the ones you were showing before represent. So I think that's kind of
So that's a good point. So and that's where this use case thing comes in. And I guess, if that's, this is the area we're exploring most at the moment. It's this thing that sits between the relying party and acts on its behalf and is trusted. We've got that agents ring around the wallets. There's some functions in there as well, and cloud agents or that kind of thing would sit in there. But it could be simpler for different use cases. Good point. Yeah. Right.
Is the OIX going to define all the use cases across different verticals to the point of what should be trusted? And the second part of that would be the relying parties have to first figure out what the use case is, figure out the mapping, and then.
So what we're going to do, what we're doing right now, is over on that side, on the credential trust rules, we're doing a piece of work around governance as to who should do that, because we're not rule makers. We explore and enable. Somebody needs to make the rules there. Who is that going to be, and how's that going to be done in a way that enables interoperability? So we're doing a piece of work on that right now. On the use case end, in respect of wallets, we think what this needs end to end is a language that enables the needs of the relying party to be described to the wallet in a way that the wallet can read and understand. We're distilling that out of the analysis we've done at the moment and trying to create a tool to enable that to happen. So we will, again, try and enable that, but there's particular rules then we think the relying party or its regulator would set and say you need to work to these rules, but we're looking at a way to express the rules in the work we're doing. I'm going to move on just because of where we are with time. Sorry. Yeah.
So when you say to the ID provider, is it one ID provider or is there multiple ID providers?
There could be. So going back to where we did our analysis, for instance, there are different models in different parts of the globe. So SingPass, Singapore, one ID provider, and it's the government. So that's one end of what we see. And then we see other models. The Swedish model is it's the banks in Sweden, facilitated and supported by the government to bring the ID to the market, but it's only the banks. We see other markets like Italy, which we didn't analyse specifically, where you've got banks and telcos and other providers all providing as ID providers in a federated way. So we see it working in either way, and the interoperability's got to work in either way. That's the challenge. So it's not just government ID to government ID. In a lot of places, we're going to have private sector IDs supported by government frameworks that need to interoperate as well.
So like you can have an enterprise defined ID or enterprise controlled provider which is providing the ID for you.
Yes.
Require ID or something.
If the framework supports that, yes. That depends on the local implementation of the framework. But yeah, the model we look at generally is a federated model, partly because that's the complex one. So we need to help people try and define how that works. I will move on. So I've been told I must not overrun under any circumstances, and I've got to leave you 5 minutes to go to the next one. So let me move on. So we've looked at that evolution of the framework for wallets. We're about interoperability. So what about wallet interoperability across frameworks? How do we make this happen? How do we make my wallet, which is full of trusted credentials, which works under my home trust framework, the one in the UK, when I come here to the US, how do we make that work? I don't want another wallet when I get here. I want the wallet or wallets I've got with the credentials that are in them that are trusted to work when my wallet roams across the world. Same way as my phone works, mostly. Same way as my payments instruments work, mostly. I want my wallet to work. And if we can start designing this now, it might always work, not just mostly like my phone seems to only work sometimes. So how are we going to enable this? So you see on the diagram I've got here, I've got credentials that are issued to me from the UK, and they're largely going to come to me from the UK because that's where I live. It's my home. But I want to present them and share them into the US, into relying parties here. If all these parties can express all of this using standard criteria descriptions so that we understand the language that is being used to communicate around credentials and wallets, then we've got a good chance that we can start to enable this, because we can start to enable how those criteria work. You'll notice I've grayed out some of the credentials in my wallet. Not everything will roam, and not everything needs to roam. My loyalty card for Boots the Chemist in the UK doesn't need to work here, even though they are owned by CVS, I think. But my Brewdog one does work here. So that one would carry on working, as I found out just over the road the other day. I'm a Brewdog shareholder, by the way, so I do like to go and give them my patronage wherever I go. I thoroughly recommend the view from up there if you don't like the beer. So how are we going to make this happen? Well, from the analysis we did, the DNA analysis, we're starting to distill what we're calling the Open Criteria Exchange tool. And essentially, it's a set of criteria and values. It's key value pairs that say, okay, my value for this particular policy area is this one. And we can map all of that back to the analysis we did within OSET, and then we can start to trade on standardized expressions of criteria and policy. And this is what we're exploring at the moment as we move forward. And I'll come on to some diagrams about how that might work in a moment. I'll come on to that now. So this you can't read. Sorry about that. I'm going to zoom in on it. But this is a sequence diagram showing, in this case, static policy rule trust. So one of the things we wanted to explore, or exploring in our working groups at the moment, is with all these policy definitions I've got, there are two options. One is we do something in a static way where there is an assessment made by the destination framework of the source framework. So someone in Australia sits down and goes through the UK framework and says, well, these are the bits we can accept, and a mapping is done. And on that basis, you say, yeah, I can trust wallets from the UK, and I can trust these credentials that are conformant with what I want. And they declare that on a trust list. It's a static analysis. It's done in the back office. It's time consuming. If you're going to do this on a multilateral basis, it's going to take forever. You might do it on a few bilaterals, but trying to do it on a multilateral basis is not going to scale. And there are things we've identified as well where wallets can adapt. So we've got this thing called wallet adaptation requirements that we are introducing. So that's the first part of the sequence diagram. The next bit is, well, what happens when the wallet's used? So the user goes along to the relying party. They want some credentials. We've introduced a new role, credential selector. And this sits in that use case provider role that we talked about earlier. We're calling it something different here because we're down in the weeds, but they could be the same thing. They are then going to work out which wallets are accepted, can they adapt, and what has the user got, which wallets has the user got that can adapt, and it's going to filter the wallet list down. So if I've got 5 wallets on my phone, this process of compatibility might filter them down to 3. The next question is, okay, these wallets are okay, what about the credentials that are being asked for? Which wallet or wallets have got the credential or credentials I'm looking for in them, and are they to the right standard? And if they are, then based on what's been published, then the list is filtered more. And then in the end, the user selects the credential they're going to share from the wallets, and then they loop into the wallets and share them. So that's the static approach. The next one is the dynamic approach. In this case, the assessment of whether the wallet is compatible in the destination framework is done dynamically. It's on the fly. It's when I land, it's not when I land, it's when I try and interact within that environment. So I'm going to drill into that top box. So what happens here is the destination framework simply publishes their criteria. What wallet criteria do I accept? What credential criteria do I accept? And this might be saying, well, I accept wallets that have these criteria. They have this kind of privacy policy. They are working to this standard. So it becomes a dynamic expression of the different policy rule criteria that are accepted, and the same for adaptation criteria. So they are published using this OSETS tool that we talked about in a key value pair way, so that a dynamic assessment can then be made when the user tries to use the wallet. And what's happening here then is the credential selector is now doing a lot more of the work, because this has got to be done dynamically. Sorry, the wallets are doing a lot more of the work as well as the credential selector. So the credential selector will get the request for credentials. It now needs to start polling out to wallets to say, okay, which do you comply with the criteria of the framework? And the wallet needs to go and get the criteria, and then at 8, the adaptation criteria, and work out if it can meet it. And the same for the credentials in it, and then at the end, so it will go around all the wallets the user has on their device and work out which one or ones can provide the criteria, the credentials that are acceptable. And in the end, they then get filtered down, and the user picks the wallets that they wish to create. Sorry, you got a question?
Why do either or? Why not do both?
Why? Sorry?
Why do either or? Why not do both?
In terms of?
Static versus dynamic.
So it could be a mixture, is where we're going to. And there's probably some static elements of this that at a headline say, well, these are the wallets I accept, and then the credential might be a bit more dynamic in terms of what criteria do they meet. So, but this is, I'm showing where we're at today in our work. But it's a really good point that they would merge in. And what the user sees here is simply something like this in terms of the credential selector. This example assumes the user's got several wallets. It should have wallet A, B, C on here, not just wallet A twice. And that it's now saying to the user, these are the credentials in the wallets you've got. Which ones do you want to share? Most of the time, this will probably be one wallet, one credential. It will just be a permission to share, permission to connect element, but sometimes this could get complicated. When I originally put my request in for this session, what I thought I was going to be doing was showing you like a Figma demo of what happens with the user here. And as we went into the analysis, actually very little happens with the user. It's something like this, and usually it's very boring. which is good for the user. That's great for the user if we can keep it simple for them. So yeah, that's a result. But this is the kind of screen that we think we will see on the wallet for the users. So again, to kind of pause for thought on this one then, these static and dynamic models, we already said that it could be a bit of both, but do you think these will work? Do you think the dynamic one will ever work? Is that a bit of a pipe dream? Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I put more on the question. The thought of the minute, just to clarify, the credential selector role is checking to see if, say, 3 out of my 5 wallets are eligible to hold my Prud'homme loyalty credential. Right? It's not checking if it's in there.
The next step would be, is it in there? Yeah. So there's a two phase.
User part rather than wallet checking.
Yeah.
It's not profiling all my wallets to see whether there's a loyalty card in them.
The way we've painted this, yes, the selector it's able to poll the wallets, and so we need some kind of ecosystem. Yes. Yes. So there's metadata there required about what's in the wallet and what credentials are in there, which is expressed using this OSET thing. So no actual data is moving around, but the metadata about what the user's got is shared to enable that decision. Again, it's food for thought as to whether that's going to work or not. But the problem we're trying to solve, though, is and we've been around this a number of times when we've been drawing these diagrams, is trying not to put a burden on the user to have to go and try and find stuff. That's why we've created that use case provider role. That means the user isn't constantly having to go, where's that? That's in that wallet, and that's in that wallet. Oh, actually, I think it's in that wallet, but it isn't compatible. And all I'm being told is no, but I don't know why. And because there's no language between the two parties to describe what's needed versus what's there, you can't explain to the user what's going on. So it's to try and address that problem for the user, that new role came about. Sorry.
So I think it's possible for dynamic. The problem is you need to define that in some universal way where you can categorize it. And so some standards, something that we go with as an industry say, hey, this is the category it falls into, here's the generic shares, and then here is, think of how we did 2-3 decades ago, 03, 04, SAML, right? Where we started putting in different classifications for our ID formats as we're passing that in the assertion. Very similarly here, you can take that same concept and say, hey, here's a generic class that we can put this into.
Yeah.
And hey, most folks' generic class lines up here, and this is interoperable this way. And then once you get to the custom ones, it depends, let's say education, right? Each country, heck, in the US, even every state, private versus public colleges will all do that differently, unfortunately.
That's.
And with that, you get into custom fields where you can say, hey, we've got a mapping for this, or we don't, right? And we can convert this, or we can go and convert it to a generic, and you can input it. Similar to when we were, again, thinking back to other technology contacts, right? How there was the V card versus attacks versus, can't remember all of them, but similar to that, where at the end of the day, you can drop it into text to the user to convert and verify between the walls.
And this is very much a journey we're on at the moment, so that's good input. But this kind of problem has been solved before elsewhere, hasn't it? That's the point you're making. So we need to apply that same kind of logic, and which implies we need some standards for this. Sorry.
So the screen that you were showing for the selection, just from my understanding, the simplifying or maybe oversimplifying things, is it that if I have to prove my age, I can use driver's license or passport or
Yeah.
the user to choose which one to use?
Yes, they can choose which one. Yeah, and it's worked out which of the credentials the users have got are valid in this context. So it's applying the rules that say they must come from a recognised government, or they must applying that kind of rule.
Thoughts around contestability. What's commercial aspects of these
Yeah.
trying to monetize that space as well.
Yeah, we've been running a separate commercial models group at the moment, and we're starting to map some of these roles into here now and say, well, actually, where's the money made here? And that use case provider role we see as a key place, because it's taking a load off the relying party and making the user experience good. That's an obvious place for for support, particularly in places where if the wallet comes from government and is provided for free, then there's no monetization option there. So that new role again helps with monetization. Let me move on to my last topic. We've only got 10 minutes left, which comes back to your earlier question around identity assurance. So one of the things we found, and you'll see this in the paper, is a model around identity assurance. And there were 5 of the frameworks we looked at had an identity assurance policy of some sort. And they were the 5 that didn't have a very clear national identity card already. They were the 5 that had to use passports or driving licenses or telephone information or bank information to identify the users. But they all exhibited the same process, and we've managed to distill a model that says what they do is they describe the credentials they accept in terms of passports, driving licenses, etc. They then validate those via some method. So is this a genuine passport by scanning it or NFC chip reading it? They then verify that the user is who they are claiming to be by taking a selfie and then cross-matching it to the passport photo. What the secret sauce of this is what they then do is they put kind of strength rating, evidential weight, we've called it at the top, and then they mix these things up. And as you step up the different levels of assurance that they're trying to achieve, they mix them up more and more, and so you've got to do this check and this check and this check. But they all follow the same method, and we've got a master spreadsheet. It's too exciting what it is, but it's a spreadsheet that shows for those 5 how this is done, and how that from these 5 golden credentials, as we called them, that those 5 frameworks derive the level of assurance for the individual that they are dealing with. And one of the things we then said, well, if that's going to work in an interoperability context, we're going to need these things to be standardized. So the premise we're looking at is not that. Come on to the next slide. So this is the output of our tool, and again, you can barely read that. I can barely read it from here. But what it showed was that for the 5 frameworks we've got, and I think you've got the UK at the top there, EU, US. That's Thailand, I think. Oh no, sorry, Canada and Thailand. This combination of different credentials, validated in different ways. Sometimes it's 1 document, sometimes it's 2 documents, depending on the level of assurance. It worked. It worked consistently across these 5 different frameworks. And for the 3 that didn't have it, the same methodology applies, because it is, but it's a 1 step from 1 document to a digital identity, so it's a simplified process. So what we're seeing here in those applied examples is things like a passport plus a bank account gives you a level of assurance when validated and verified in a certain way. So what we're looking at now is, rather than levels of assurance having to be harmonized or analysis having to be done to make them compatible, we recalculate them from the credentials that are in the user's wallet. So in the same as we saw the wallet roaming and then credentials being assessed, we have a kind of specialist process here for identity assurance. And in this case, there's a static process which would be saying, I trust your level of assurance. So the static version would say, right, I from the US, trust the UK level of assurance medium, and I say it's equivalent to an IAL2. So that's one way to deal with this. But that means, again, that's got to be done bilaterally, and everyone's got to do analysis on that. So the dynamic version is we get a request for a destination LOA, we discover a destination identity proofing provider. So I've now landed in the US, is now discovering an agent, a proofing provider in the US, who can take me through the US version of the rules. It will then request credentials from me, which are to those international standards, and then those are filtered down to those that meet the requirements. I then agree to share those with the IDPP, who then take my passport, my driving license, bank account, whatever, put it through the model for assurance in the US, and it spits out what we've called a derived credential. It's a new credential that says I've now got IAL2 in the US. And all of that is traceable through that destination IDPP. This is one way we've got of doing this. We've got another one where the wallet itself does this, in which case it's playing the role of the destination IDPP, so it's pretty clever if it's able to do that, and that's why we separated it out. But we see this could be the way to deal with levels of assurance as we roam. We don't try and take the one, in my case, my level of assurance medium with me. I recalculate an IAL2 in the US based on the credentials I've got in my wallet. And again, this is what we're exploring at the moment. Is this a kind of valid approach to do this? So the question at the end of that one then is, does LOA alignment therefore matter at all? Are we spending too much time worrying about whether we align LOAs, levels of assurance, across different frameworks? If we can always calculate the destination one from credentials that we've got in a wallet, and is that the solution to this problem? What do you think to that?
I had a different question than all that.
Okay.
I was sort of interested from the perspective of the person who's providing the credentials. Do you have something built in that would allow the person that's providing credentials some level of assurance that the person they're providing them to?
Yeah, good question. It's not. Yes, that's part of that whole trust between parties, as opposed to trust in the credentials, is part of what we do in the frameworks, but not. We weren't exploring that layer here. We're assuming that all of that is done magically by some other process, but that's the horrible process. And if you look at what the EU is trying to do on that, around all the options it's coming up with, it's quite scary. Yeah.
So in this case, I think if you were coming from UK and you're landing in US and doing the identity proofing here, that provider has to also be trusted by the UK provider, because unless and until these two providers trust each other, only then they can validate those identities or the credentials.
In terms of the inter-party trust, yes, you would need to have that.
Only if that is available, then you don't need to go through this whole approach of validating the knowledge. Those two has to be trusted.
Yes, so you'd have to have a trust list that said these are the proofing providers that are trusted to do this with these.
Then they
Yeah.
would draw.
Yeah.
That would be good. But I had a subsequent question was, you land in US, you go through that process, you have a brand new wallet, which is temporary for you while you're in US, or that's more like, will always be there with you forever?
So we're thinking that this new credential gets put in my UK-based wallet. But again, that means that the credential issuer in the UK has got to trust that wallet as a repository for its credential. If it doesn't, you're right, you'd have to have another wallet locally to put that in.
But at that point, because let's say if you have provided your driver's license, the driver's license expires, the credential
Right, I
has
think.
to revoke.
Yes, and that's so. The more we can keep this thing in the one wallet, the better. Sorry, I'm going to 2 quick questions. I need to wrap up.
I think your LOA alignment matters starting to break down. Like, I think it's starting to not matter as much.
Yeah.
Like, I think if you look at the role of Microsoft Authenticator and how it's starting to get cloudy about LOA and what it's really.
Yeah. So you've seen that already.
Yeah.
Really. Thank you. One last question. Yeah. Sorry.
With respect to
Oh, the money laundering thing. Fit.
standards, which a lot of countries try to get some sort of convergence
Yeah.
in terms of the controls they have around it.
Yeah. We haven't looked at that at OIX. With other hats on, I've looked at it, which we can talk about separately. But yeah, good point. There's that layer as well. We haven't done specific AML analysis on this. So, yeah. Cool. All right, I need to wrap up because someone was waving something at the back, saying I need to. So just as a takeaway, what you've seen today is we're expanding trust frameworks to involve wallets. They're now digital identity and credential trust frameworks. We need some new rules, therefore, for the credential bits and also this new use case role. If we're going to enable roaming wallets, we need a way to express policy criteria, and that's something we're working on and exploring. That's going to get quite technical. I suspect that won't be us who does the technical bit of that. We're not, we'll push this as far as making the need for this clear. And it looks like you don't need to worry about LOA comparisons. We can reformulate them as we go. So they're the kind of 3 takeaways I'd leave you with. If you want to know more about us, we have a booth in the exhibition area. I can't remember the number of it now. I'm here, myself and my colleague Gareth's here as well. So just give us a shout, and if you want to get involved in what we do, you're very welcome to join as members. All right, thank you.